now as warm and toasty as we all are. So we'll try and go. Thank you for having me. This is telling you what we're going to do about, and again, we know what we're going to do about because we are here. But I wonder how many of us were wondering quite what the timings were, so we looked at a programme before we came. And I'm sure that very few of you saw the programme on your computer on the Fenland History on Facebook site. But I can tell you that over 5,000 people did. Fenland History on Facebook is a place to seek and share information on Cambridge, Cambridgeshire and the Fens, although if it comes to priority, the Fens come first. We have 5,000 people see every post, the majority of whom live in the north of the county, although there are 700 in Cambridge itself. It is a way to seek and share information, especially important in these days when we're losing so many resources through government cuts and cutbacks of various sorts. I will start Fenland History on Facebook. My day starts by reading the papers of today to provide a story that happened on this day in some time past. This was a story that appeared in the paper on the 5th of March 1919. It was a gas poisoning at the university. Research on oxygen treatment for gas poisoning is an example of one of the ways in which the university have helped the country during the war. And I put pictures to go with these Facebook things because, and these are two of the pictures I put are on the left-hand side. One, of course, a picture of men in gas masks. The other is not actually the gas ward that's being referred to, it's the bath ward. But it's the bath ward at the First Eastern General Hospital, which of course is just behind us, and it's one of the pictures that was taken by the photographer that Peter was talking about. And one of the great excitements was when working through those boxes and boxes and boxes and boxes and boxes in Post Office Terrace to actually come across one that when you opened it up, the 100 plates were all of the First Eastern General Hospital, where they had carried their cameras into the huts and taken pictures inside the operating theatre of Cambridge surgeons working on wounded soldiers. And again, they even published a picture postcard looking across the site there. Now that's particularly relevant because this was an example talking about the work that was started in the Cambridge Physiological Laboratories early in 1917 at Springfield, Sidgwick Avenue, which is being used as a special ward for 30 people. There are 14 beds in the oxygen chamber constructed in. I'm not sure how many of us know that on this site, during the First World War, the University of Cambridge was undertaking major activity to help in the treatment of gas. But it is an example of what we don't know. Now, this is a picture postcard. It's a picture postcard of my village, which was sent to me in July of 1949 while I was staying with an auntie in Hull Beach. I still got it. I have been collecting material on Cambridgeshire for over 70 years. The picture when I got it in 1949 was already old. I must have looked at that and realised it was different. Mind you, the lady there's crossing the road, that's Mrs. Go-to-Bed, she's walking across to her butcher shop on the other side of the road, and she hasn't moved an inch since that photographer from Coates of Wisbech picked the shutter. But that is something that interested me as a youngster in my villages and its past. And when I got a camera, one of the first things I did was to try and stand where that photographer had stood and take that picture. And then, of course, you can compare and contrast, and rather than just collecting, you can start to analyse. And that really got my interest in local history. And led a few years later to my discovering in that library in Cambridge. Don't know why I got a job in Cambridge, never been to Cambridge before in my life, certainly never been to a public library, but to discover a public library in Cambridge which had a room that was tucked away, and in that room, people say I invented the Cambridgeshire Collection. I did not invent the Cambridgeshire Collection. The Cambridgeshire Collection was invented in 1855, before it had been collected for 110 years before I found it. What I was privileged to do was to find this room in which books has been put for 110 years. I was lucky to have the opportunity to read every book. To catalogue every chapter, every article, every paragraph, if necessary, to unlock the material. You know, if you're doing your history, you rely on archives, you rely on museums, you rely on books. I will say that an archivist archives and a curator curates. The librarian liberates. We take the words that are written and we share them. But the books were there. All I did was to sort them. The newspapers, most of them were there. They still dated back to the 1770s. They had been collected and were there. What I was privileged to do was to put in the index, which unlocked the stories of those. The maps were there. I didn't know my way around Cambridge. I found my way around Cambridge by following a map. The map was 1574. But hey, Cambridge hasn't changed. The handbills were there, the posters were there. When I found it, there were 400 pictures. When I left it, there were 400,000. Things had changed. And the picture there was the CAS badge. Because I don't remember when I joined the CAS, but it must have been probably 50 years ago. I don't think I've been to many meetings since then. Cambridge Antiquarian Society gave me the opportunity to meet people who were interested in their past and who would give support to a youngster who was just trying to find out. But Cambridge Antiquarian Society membership gave me not only the opportunity to attend meetings, but the opportunity to make use of the resources that the Cambridge Antiquarian Society had collected, and they included pictures. Now I had, as you see, an interest in the pictures, and I discovered that the Cambridge Antiquarian Society library contained photographs, including this one, which was to have a particular relevance to me many years later, because many years later I moved into a house. And this is the roof of my front door. And it's looking down Reed Street in Streatham. And it was taken by a member of the Cambridge Antiquarian Society, who turned up with a camera and the ability to take a far better picture than I of an area that they thought were going to change. And 8 years earlier, another member of the Cambridge Antiquarian Society had turned out, and they had taken a picture of the building just off the road. And these photographs aren't very good. People will look at these, oh, they're out of focus and all the rest of it. But this is a poor picture taken by a great antiquarian, William Mortlock Palmer, the man who revived the Cambridge Antiquarian Society collection. He wasn't a good photographer, but he was a great antiquarian. And the other gentleman who'd taken the picture was J.H. Bullock. And J.H. Bullock was both an antiquarian and a photographer. They were some of the named people who, from the 1920s, were taking pictures of Cambridgeshire. Frank Allen, James Bywater, Herbert Johnson, Evelyn White, Douglas Gavin, Percy Salmon. Percy Salmon was an absolutely fantastic photographer based in Melbourne who took pictures and published books. Rex Wales, who took and William Tams. But these were the people who were members of the Antiquarian Society, or who joined this vision of the Antiquarian Society that Cambridge was changing. We were losing our past and it needed to be recorded, and they set out to record it. They got in their motor cars and they drove into the countryside. I have great privilege because in the last 20, 30 years I've been wandering around Cambridgeshire giving talks to about 4 groups a week, so I see a bit of Cambridgeshire, but these people are having the fun of seeing it from their own. They are traveling. Dr. Palmer didn't drive, but he had a chauffeur. I was privileged to talk to the man who used to drive Dr. Palmer around on his photographic expedition. This is Douglas Garrin Reid, who goes out with his wife in their motor car to explore. And they explore this county of Cambridgeshire. Now you know this county of Cambridgeshire is fantastic. It is a county of white chalk hills and black fen land. And again, it always stands out to me that sometimes I'll go and give a talk and I will drive 30 miles to a talk, and I'm driving 30 miles into the black flatness of the country around Wisbech, and the next night I might take another 30-mile journey, but this time I'm up in those hills. The county is black and the county is white, the county is diverse, and these people are trying to capture what it is all about. They are antiquarians, so they take things that are particularly relevant to antiquarians. They take pictures of archaeology, of these humps and bumps and the fields at Burwell, where once was a castle which had been erected by King Stephen in that battle against Geoffrey de Mandeville. And is that the church in the background where the archer took aim with that arrow that missed de Mandeville but just scratched his ear, which caused the infection which was to kill that great villain, which was going to see the history of England change in an insignificant battle in an insignificant unfinished war. It's that areas. Now again, you can tell the story of a picture to go with it, and that is Dr. Palmer. That's William Palmer with his better camera, taking his snap of an area. They are interested in churches, they are interested in buildings. And some of the people who have an interest in buildings and take their own photographs pass them on to the Cambridge Antiquarian Society. Because you've got photographs, what do you do with the dad's photos? You don't know what to do. You pass them on to somebody who cares. In those days it was the Antiquarian Society who cares. This is at Horse Heath, which is a wonderful picture. It's the one that I use when I'm giving the talk about ghosts and witches. I always use this picture because, of course, it was the lady Catherine Parsons, who stood up to a meeting of the Cambridge Antiquarian Society to tell you all about ghosts and witches. And you imagine the impact of the audience when she stood up. Gentlemen, I'm talking to you today about ghosts and witches. But I'm not talking about ghosts and witches of the 1600s, gentlemen. I'm talking about ghosts and witches today. Can you see the reaction of your antiquarian audience in 1916 when this lady, But antiquarians have an interest in buildings. As part of that, this is a group of members of the Cambridge Antiquarian Society looking at ancient buildings at Linton. And you can tell the story of buildings by the fabric of the building and the way they're constructed. I can't do that. But I know people can, and respect that. And they are taking pictures of areas that they think may change. They're wandering around just taking a nice line, a middle line of cottage. And how often do we do this? We wander around in our own villages, we take a snap, but there are certain places we don't snap because it hasn't going to change. And it's always going to be there until the front falls off the house. It's then that you realise that you've never quite taken the picture. But this is what is antiquarian. In village after village, they are visiting, but they are also encouraging people to record. They are recording shops. Do you remember when villages used to have shops? When villages used to have post offices? And here you've got Dr. Palmer emerging, having stopped off at the post office at the shop in Kirtling on a chocolate break. after the book was first published, I got keen, and whenever I was giving talks, I would take a copy of the book round with me and try and flog it to the person who. I was trying to find where the picture was taken, take a modern picture. And I went and gave a talk in Kirtling, and I tracked this house down, and I took a picture of it, and being then keen, and I thought I'd have a go, I'd perhaps get a sale. I knocked on the door of the house and said, "Excuse me, madam, I've got a picture of your house taken on, it's in the front cover of this book, it was taken." And the lady looked at me very oddly, and she said, "That's not my house, duck. I live in a house, I don't live in a shop." She would not believe that her house had been a shop. Yeah. That again is part of the importance of these snaps. These snaps are only recorded. They are also there if you want to restore the place and you want to put in new windows and the planners say no, but you can show that that was what was there. They are taking pictures of barns, which is interesting because they are taking pictures in the 20s and 30s. And in the 20s and 30s, the county is on its knees, and agriculture is on its knees. And in a way, it's a wonderful picture, but is it a false picture? These antiquarian gentlemen are going inside barns. And once they are inside barns, they are also snapping some of the equipment that's there. Now, I can't tell you what sort of a binder that is, but I know that people do, and I put that on Fenland History on Facebook, and I will have scores after scores of people who are giving me details of. And again, those building experts, well, you can judge on the way these beams are joined down, all the rest of it. They are interested in watermills. And Cambridgeshire has a number of watermills, not just the one at Grantchester that burnt down in 1926, but also the one in the Millpool, and you've got the Whittlesford and all the rest of it. And so when you're travelling, you take pictures of watermills. And Cambridgeshire has windmills. And people get passionate on windmills, and members of the Cambridge Antiquarian Society got passionate on windmills. When H.C. Hughes read his 2 papers on the windmills of Cambridgeshire and the MBE to the members of the society, and then followed it up with that paper on Huntingdonshire windmills, he showed slides. He showed lantern slides. And those lantern slides had been taken by that dedicated subgroup of members of the Cambridge Antiquarian Society Photographic Survey, who, with Rex Wales, took photographs of every windmill in Cambridgeshire. So, and you now know there's this Windmill Society who have a fantastic website with pictures and details, and they will. We've got people like Peter Philby, as you know, who can tell you just what that man is doing at that mill and what is, yeah. So although it's a picture taken by the antiquaries, it is so interesting for industrial archaeologists as well as the village historians, as well as nationally. And people like Douglas Gavin Reed, who was worked at one of the labs as a technician. He got absolutely besotted with the fens. He and his wife travelled deep into the fenland to take photographs of dikes and drains and things that are absolutely fascinating for people today. And they took this. He took this picture in 1914. Why travel to Holland to take a picture? No, you're not. This is Soham. It's Soham Fen. It's some of the drainage wind pumps of Soham Fen. I showed this number of occasions, but I showed it to a wonderful gentleman out at Soham. Jim Ames passed away now. And he looked at that, he said, "Cool, Mike, that takes me back, that really does. My gran, she used to live in that wind pump. And she always used to say that was the dangerous place she's ever lived in her life. Because you see, they've got a front door there, and they've got the wind sails that go round, and the sails go round, but they also swing round. And if you're coming out your door, you need to know quite where the sail is before." And that is so relevant because it's picking up the story of people living in windmills, but it's also enabling a gentleman who really knew his history to be reminded of something perhaps he would have forgotten. And again, those wind pumps are going to give way in the 1800s to the steam engines, which are in turn going to be replaced in the 1930s by the diesel pumps. And now the antiquarians are not comprehensive in their coverage. They are photographing in the 20s and 30s, but they have very little way of industrial archaeology in the way of steam pumps or pumping material in the fens. They are travelling in the 1920s and 1930s is an area of the country where there is change. We are having massive change. We know we're talking about the A14 and all the rest of it, but it was in the 1920s and 1930s that so many new roads were put in. We put in that 20 pence road from Wilburton to Cottenham because of the pressure on the A10 road from Cambridge to Ely. The A10 road couldn't take the traffic and it needed a bypass. And one of the ideas was there should be a new road. Should it be a road along the old Aldworth Causeway, traditional way onto the Isle that lead Cambridge through to Rampton and Willingham? Or should there be a new road down that drove and over the 20 pence ferry? Well, this was one of Gavin Reed's pictures of the 20 pence ferry, and he later followed it up by showing the bridge that was going in. And again, if you think of the rebuilding of the A10 bridge at Streatham Ferry, you're thinking about the rebuilding on the Meikle and all the rest of it. Our antiquarians are covering developments and planning and activities and the future, not just the past. When I was invited to produce the Vanishing Cambridgeshire book, then part of my brief was to select some pictures that would illustrate that. As you know, it went to 3 volumes. There was the first one that sold out. The second one was the much better one. That was the one where we put in the extra Fenland pictures. The third one was, I don't think we did. But it was a way of sharing, and but when you're putting it, it's not just a case of, first of all, you've got to find the pictures. Well, the pictures by then, the Antiquarian Society's photographs had left the Haddon Library, had left Archaeology, and they had been relocated in that new Cambridgeshire Collection suite in the new Lion Yard Library. With the support of members of the Society and others, we had managed to get that area. And tucked away on one of those cabinets were the little drawers that held the photographs that had been rebadged by then. So that there were little folders, weren't there? The folders of pictures of Abington, Ashley, Aldworth, Bagram, because they'd covered everything. And it was just a case then of going through and choosing the ones that I wanted for the book. But hang on, there were more than just those pictures that were filed away in those envelopes, because there were the glass negatives. There were the glass negatives that were taken by people like Douglas Gavin Reed. Those 7 boxes of negatives of pictures of caravans at Turf Fen Ad. One box has gone missing. I'm not sure quite what happened to the missing box or where it is, but somewhere out there, perhaps in one of your departments, there is a box like this that has photographs of Fenland that were used by people like Clifford Darby, Prof Darby. But these were only some of the negatives. There were so many other negatives, files and folders of negatives that had never been printed, that found their way to the collection. And again, one of the things that we did was to go through them and just list them. just list the negatives and produce an index. So, and some of the other things we went through, where it's got a T beside it, is when you get a negative. The trouble is with negatives, you have to make a print from a negative, and that means you have to get a photographer, someone like Peter, to do it, and that means you have to pay a photographer. That means you have to have a piece of paper on which to put it, and having put your piece of paper on, you've got somewhere to file it, and on the other hand, you can just take a transparency of a negative. Put a negative on a light box, take a slide of it, negative of a negative as a positive. So again, that's one way of sharing pictures without going to the expense of. And then, of course, there were the lantern slides, because as well as the photographic prints and the photographic negatives, there were the Antiquarian Society glass lantern slides, and they had been deposited in the record office. And so they've got the material that's there in the record office, which may well supplement the negatives and the positives that have been built up. For example, on this one of Mr. Bullock there at the Anchor at Stuntney, taking his photograph of the picture of him taking a photo is amongst the material that's held in the collection that is deposited in the Cambridgeshire Collection. The photograph that he has taken is a glass lantern slide, and that is in the record office. So the Antiquarian Society collection is in fact split into two separate depositories. My job was to bring those together to produce some pictures that could make a book. Now, I'm not a very good researcher because, see, the publisher was going to take these pictures away and take scans of them. Now, this was in the days that we didn't all understand scans and digitisation. And I wasn't very good. I tended to select far more pictures than we'd ever have space for. Can't work out how that worked. But it did mean that we got digitised copies of a large number of pictures provided by the publisher. And of course, once you've got one set of digitised pictures, it's relatively easy just to copy the disc, and then you've got copies that can be shared. And then once you've chosen the pictures, you need to know what they show. And it's been lovely hearing the details of all the things about Porthole and all the rest of it, but how can anybody know what the pictures show? Now, there are the index cards, of course, because the Antiquarian Society, being a proper library, have its own index cards, and it will tell me there that these pictures of Streatham were taken in 1928 or whatever. And I can perhaps tell you what it is that they're showing, but how can one person know what the pictures are showing around the rest of the county? Because this collection covered every village in Cambridgeshire, from Royston to Littleport and a little bit beyond. Well, I needed to write captions, so I helped and I researched and I looked at whatever I could find to put a caption to go with them. And one of the pictures was this of this barn at Landbeach. Now, Landbeach, we should surely, of all places, know about the history of Landbeach, because you've got Jack Ravensdale there, and Jack, the great local historian, and they take such a care and interest. But nobody in Landbeach seemed to know what the picture was of. And I got it down in the edition that it was the tithe barn. But then it transpired it wasn't the tithe barn. One of the benefits of doing a second edition, of course, is you can do the amendments. And you're always learning. These days, I could found a little bit more easily, because these days, of course, we've got the Cambridgeshire Scrapbook. And you'll know that that Cambridgeshire Scrapbook is a summary of stories appearing in Cambridge newspapers between 1897 and 1990. you know that it's that scrapbook that is the essence, little snippets and interesting articles about fires and burglaries and marriages and that appeared in the paper. I just read 100 years of Cambridge papers and produced an index to all the interesting little articles. It's on my computer. And everything that's on my computer is on your computer. So on your computer you have a Cambridgeshire scrapbook. You can read it, you can print it out if you like. 3,500 pages long. You can print it out if you like. Better if you download it. And then because it's so long, we produced 100 mini scrapbooks. So there's an E&E scrapbook and a Sawston scrapbook and a Shelton scrapbook and a Huntingdon scrapbook and it's not everything that happened in that time, but it is a scrapbook of stories from 1897 to 1990. Therefore, if you know the Cambridge Antiquarian Society is visiting that place and taking pictures in the 1930s, if you don't know what the picture shows, then you can at least write an article about the situation of the county and what was happening at the time. It will give you the opportunity to make a caption when you're stuck. And these days, of course, you can enhance that on Fenland History on Facebook, because every day we have posts and every post is seen on 500 computers plus. And one of the posts we've been doing every day is to work through these photographs taken by the Antiquarian Society and sending out to people, and people have been responding. And people have been responding online and telling us where the picture is, but most importantly, they have been encouraged to go out with their laptops and their tablets and to find where that photographer stood and take another picture. Now, that may be stimulating people to take an interest in their area, and if that's what it's about, then that's what it's about. It's getting people to take an interest in the past. And this attempt to reconstruct this fantastic Cambridgeshire photographic record, of course, supplements what the Cambridgeshire Association for Local History did a few years ago, in which we encouraged our members to do the same thing. Many of our members of that society were sent photocopies of the photographs that the antiquarians had taken and invited to try and have the fun of tracking it down and read. And these are just a few of the pictures that came in at that time. It's the simplest thing in the world to do, but it will interest people in their history. It's making pictures can bring them, give an interest, give somebody an excuse to walk around, an interest to stop and an interest to talk. And I can't help thinking that that's what those antiquarians would have wanted at that time. But that is Cambridgeshire. Cambridge town is different. And Cambridge town is such a diverse entity, isn't it? It isn't just one town. It's so many communities. There's the Chesterton, which is different from the Romsey, which is different from the Cherry Hinton. And there is the academic, which is different from the town, and within the academic you've got the various departments, and within that, the academic, you've got the various colleges and the antiquarians survey Cambridge. There is one area that they do not survey: the colleges and the university. It's gaps that they do not cover. Other people can take their pictures of Clare, but not the antiquarians. And the antiquarians, of course, are now involved in the Museum of Archaeology on the Downing site, which was opened in 1904 by the King, as you recollect if you read that article in the Fenland History on Facebook the other day, which talked about the riots that followed the opening of those university labs. And it was at that time that members of the Antiquarian Society started a photographic record. They were concerned in 1904 that Cambridge was changing, and it was changing without being recorded. Well, this, of course, that is what it was before the King had opened the labs. And yes, I've only seen one photograph of that side of Downing Street before the laboratories were there. There was a need to record the town. The town was changing, especially in that 1920s, 1930s, in that interwar period, when people like Dr. Palmer from Linton are leading this revival of the photographic survey. This you instantly recognise is the record office on the top of Castle Hill. Yeah, it's the record office at the top of Castle Hill before it was pulled down to be rebuilt as the Shire Hall. It was the county jail, but of course the county jail had stopped at the end of the First World War, and that was being used as a depository for government records. Yeah, the county jail on Castle Hill, pulled down in 1930. The Antiquarians took the outside. They also went inside and took pictures of the inner cells. When I first giving talks to groups about 50 years ago, whenever I went to an old folks group, I would always say to, excuse me, anybody in the room ever been in the condemned cell of Cambridge Castle? And people would put their hands up. I don't know what's happened these days, but if I go now, there's so few people do. Don't seem to be the people who remember being taken into the condemned cell at county jail in the 1930s anymore. What's happened to those people? Not just me getting old, is it? They are concerned of what is going on in the old part of Cambridge around the Castle Hill, the Castle End, where there's danger that St Peter's Church is going to fall, and these squalid little alleyways and courts are. So the antiquarian gentlemen take their cameras into the back streets of Castle Hill, into alleyways and courts that are so dark that they can't take photographs because there just isn't enough light to enable them to get a clear photo. They take pictures of the main castle street. If you look at the post in today, the news of today that appears in Fenland History on Facebook, I think it's 1904, they're talking about the problems of the Swans public house on Castle Hill. This was Wayman's Inn on Castle Hill. This was one of the great antiquarian debates that they were having, because this, of course, is the inn where Dick Turpin stayed. They'd have quite happily given him accommodation just across the way in the county jail, but he chose for some reason to stay at the pub opposite instead of that. And that's where he left his coat, and that was the ancient inn that was so much part of Cambridge's story, which was being condemned. Now people were saying, no, that's ramshackled and run down, that ought to be destroyed. And so the antiquarians went to take their picture of it before it was lost forever, in the same way that Redfern had been doing his drawings of vanished Cambridge. But of course we know that that building was renovated. It became that. But it was still demolished, because people said that this renovation is a mock renovation. We lost it. It was just one of the numerous buildings that were being ripped out in central Cambridge in that interwar period. At the bottom of Castle Hill, the courtyard there, which was, as you know, the Camden Museum. Okay. The problem with that junction was it was too narrow. The junction was coming from Northampton Street with Chesterton Lane or what was too narrow, which is why they ripped down that wood yard on the right-hand side so that they could improve the traffic. And much of the redevelopment of Cambridge in the 20s and 30s is there to cater for the traffic. They're putting in the traffic lights to save the policemen having to do pointed. And these old buildings, well, they're just ramshackled old buildings, aren't they? You look at Magdalen Street, there's Magdalen Street. It's so narrow, and it's got those old ramshackle buildings on the right-hand side. No wonder those buildings need pulling down. And as you know, those buildings were planned to be pulled down. Magdalen wanted to pull those buildings down so that they could build a nice new court, but they ran out of money. And by the time they'd got enough money, the things had changed. The corporation still wanted those buildings pulled down in the 1950s to provide a modern new motor road straight into Cambridge. But by then, Magdalen was saying, no, we quite like those buildings. The prospect of ripping that Magdalen Street out to make a motor road is precisely what happened in Bridge Street, isn't it? Yeah. Because if you're looking up the hill, the buildings on the left-hand side, of Bridge Street, with the jetty buildings, they were ripped out. Which is why when you look at this picture from the corner of the round church, you don't recognise it. You think you recognise the buildings on the right-hand side, although those buildings on the right-hand side, of course, were also to have been demolished in the 1960s to improve Cambridge, and it was only because the world had changed and people decided to keep facades and build behind that stays. Oh, we've done away with the garage. But then again, that was part of that. But the buildings on the left-hand side, those are what was ripped down by St John's College to put in their music school to open up this area of central Cambridge. We really have difficulty realising just what was happening in Cambridge at that period. But the antiquarians were there to make some record of it. This street you instantly recognise, it's Sydney Street. It's a Sydney Street that was ripped down to make way for the modern Woolworths and Sainsbury's and Marks and Spencer, as we ripped out that side of Sydney Street. And this is the other side of Sydney Street, seen from the junction of Pettycury. Those old buildings which we've ripped down to put in that modern Boots block that we've come to accept. But put those two pictures together, and what you're giving is a picture of what the town was like. And you've got the telephone box. When did telephone boxes come? And then, of course, you've got Pettycury, the old Pettycury. And what a shame they ripped down the old Pettycury, they said in the 1860s. But they did rip down the old Pettycury. The buildings on the right-hand side on the picture were ripped down for the Victorian rebuilding that was to give us Falcon Yard and Alexandra Street, and yes, that building we remember so fondly as Mac Fisheries. The buildings on the other side, on the left-hand side, were ripped down in the 1930s to give us the Boots and in traffic. Remember when there were motor cars and one-way streets and the antiquarians are navigating their cars down Pettycury on their way to deposit their material in. And in the heart of Cambridge, the Guild Hall. This is Pease Hill. You instantly recognise it. You've got the library there on the right-hand side, the library just showing above the remains of that corn merchant's premises, which burned down in that great fire in 1904, which was part of the reason why the Antiquarians decided they'd take. And the building looking down towards the market, of course, are the buildings that were going to be ripped down to put up the new Cambridge Guildhall. And I find it interesting that to put up a new Cambridge Guildhall, you need to remove these old buildings. And it was only when they were pulling the old buildings down that they realised behind the facade was a half-timbered house, which was quite probably the oldest domestic building left in Cambridge. That was ripped down when they put the new Guildhall up. But of course you'll be reminded that I haven't quite told you the story. The old building disappeared, but it wasn't ripped down, it was taken down brick by brick, beam by beam, and re-erected in Long Road at Trumpington, which is why one of the oldest domestic buildings in the heart of Cambridge is still in Cambridge, although now on the edge. And of course the market itself, which is doing what markets do, which is the place where you can get your meat from the butcher, which is the place where, and again this is the 1920s, and I think what's so evocative of this picture, the Antiquarians, is the lady in her furs looking at the stall of second-hand clothes. And it's nestled itself underneath that great structure, which is the conduit in the centre of the market that was erected in 1856 following that massive redevelopment of the market following the fire that devastated those houses in the centre of town. And that is recorded by the Antiquarians. This is a picture that Peter has been talking about, negatives and the technology, and these days we carry cameras around on our belts and we can take snaps. You're talking about days, as Peter's reminding us, where we have negatives but this picture captures so much of the way that Cambridge is changing. If you just look at it, what have you got? You've got colleges, you've got King's, you've got university, you've got the old schools, you've got churches, you've got development, you've got electricity, you've got electricity generating. Of course it was first electricity in Cambridge was generated by the generating plant in the basement of Bailey, Grundy and Barrett's that was used to supply the electricity that lit those lamps around Great St Mary's Church. You're looking of course at war, because the war memorial for the Boer War. You're looking at transport. You're looking at horse-drawn cabs. You're looking at guided bus. Yeah, those lines in the street are the lines of the Cambridge Street trams. The guided bus. You're looking at the shops, you're looking at the telephones, you're looking at all of those elements that make up a town. And yet, it seems that we know it all. We recognise it all. Cambridge hasn't changed. Yet just change your perspective slightly. You are still in the heart of Cambridge. And yet now you are struggling to recognise anything. You're catching a glimpse of the pit press. You've got the Bailey and Barrett building still there on the corner of St Mary's Passage. But what's all this? What's all this in the centre? Well, that is that Guildhall site that's going to be ripped down and redeveloped. You've still got the large hall. You're really, however well you know Cambridge, you will be puzzled. Cambridge has changed that much. And that was what the antiquarians felt, and that is why they started to produce there. And I chose the picture to go on the cover of one of the volumes of the Vanishing Cambridge, and I've also chose it as the cover picture for a Chronicle of Cambridge news. Now, you know you've got the Cambridgeshire scrapbook, you know it's 3,500 pages, you know it covers all of Cambridgeshire from 1897 to 1990. But you'll know also that you've got a Chronicle of Cambridge. It's not 3,500 pages, it's 4,000 pages. And it's divided into 100 chapters. So there's a chapter on buses, and there's a chapter on water, there's a chapter on women, there's a chapter on university, there's a chapter on colleges, there's a chapter on undergraduates, there's a chapter on theatre and cinema and music and changes. Blow by blow then, and every section you can see that this happened in 1912, this happened in 1913, this happened in right to the period that the antiquarians are photographing. These are references to the newspaper articles that describe what they have depicted. And of course you may be aware that you've also got on your computer the copies of the actual articles. Yeah, you knew that anyway. It's one way of sharing and making accessible information. And again, at a time when we are losing the staffing of our libraries and our record offices are being cut, it's a way of sharing and it's a way of making accessible. The Cambridge Chronicle covers 100 years in great detail, but it isn't complete. Nothing ever complete. This photograph was taken by members of the Cambridge Antiquarian Society. How did they take it? They had to find somewhere high enough to get. And what is that? It's the scaffolding at the top of Holy Trinity Church. And when was Holy Trinity Church spire restored? I can't tell you. It's not in the history books. If you look at the guide to the church, it's not there. You go through the newspaper, it is a mystery. But again, that's Cambridge, isn't it? You can never know. If everything you think you know about Cambridge is good, ask another question. The answer, I've read the papers for 100 years, I don't know. I do not know when they put that scaffolding up so that the man could take his camera and scramble to the top of that scaffolding to take. But I know they did it because we've got the evidence. I will discover it, and it will be published in Fenland History on Facebook. Every day I do posts about stories of this date in the past to share with people. And as you will have noticed, we're currently also sharing a wonderful development by a group called the Cambridge Antiquarian Society to share maps of Cambridge and Cambridgeshire that they have digitised in, and they are now going out every day. I'll choose not the whole map, just a little section, and look at the number of people who are saying, that's made me realise, that's opened up my eyes, and that is what local history is all about, I think, and this is a way that we can share it. But in order to share it, you've got to have people who take it. And of course it's members of this society who in the past have taken those photographs. So I think local historians, not just local ones, national ones, are so grateful to this society for its enterprise and for its continued activity in sharing the resources that it has at its disposal. And thank you for giving me the chance to say thank you to you for what you've been doing.